Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back one more time to the Pilates Goddess podcast. This is your host, Lynda Lippin, and today I am going to remind you that whether you are a Pilates client or a movement teacher, you can say no. Now, this comes up in a number of contexts within a Pilates business or Pilates studio. And I'm going to start with the basics as a Pilates client because I go through this myself. If you can, sit down and think back to classes and sessions that you've taken over the years. And I've been teaching Pilates for over 34 years, but I've been doing Pilates for longer than that. And think back to times when maybe you questioned an exercise or a spring weight or, something that didn't feel great to you at the time, but didn't say anything and just kept doing it. And then had some negative fallout later on. Your back hurt, your neck hurt, you had undue soreness, something's you felt off in a way that you shouldn't have. And if that's happened to you, you are exactly the client that needs to remember that you don't have to do everything that the teacher tells you to do, especially if it doesn't feel safe or okay to you. Frankly, a decent teacher should be able to give you a different option, even in a group setting. Because let's face it, sometimes you're just not comfortable lying on your stomach, or you're not comfortable lying down or going back with your head because you've got vertigo, or, there's something going on with your feet. And so you would rather not, do calf stretch on your toes. You would rather be maybe a little bit differently positioned on your foot, whatever that looks like for you. You are allowed to find modifications that work for you, and you are allowed to do those modifications. I think in several podcast episodes, I have said that my fallback, if I know that I have people in class who will need modifications, is to modify the entire class for everybody and frame it as having a different experience of the exercises. Okay. And that way everybody feels good about class. Nobody feels singled out or left out, and everything goes well. But if that's not something you're interested in doing, or as a client, that's just something that never happens, although you could suggest it, then learn the modifications that are good for you, or other exercises that you can do at the same time, and go with those. Say no to exercises that you know could hurt you. And I'm speaking from experience. Okay, I have been in classes where the teacher, say, was having us do a lot of frogs and a lot of variations on frogs on the reformer, right? So we were doing bow and arrow, and we were doing frogs, and we were doing leg circles, and we were doing all kinds of things. And my hips are arthritic, and I'm very hypermobile. And in the middle of doing these, I thought to myself, this probably isn't going to be good tomorrow. And in fact, it wasn't good about 6 hours later, and really wasn't good the next day. But I kind of allowed it to happen, right? And I'm a trained professional, and I do know a little bit about what's going on in my own body. And I felt that kind of happen when I crossed over that border from this is okay to it's not. And I just kept on going. I don't do that anymore. Now I'll do a modification. I'll stop. Sometimes I'll do a smaller range of motion. I'll do something different. I'll do something in parallel. I'll do something that won't necessarily disturb the entire class, but I won't continue on with things that, I know are going to hurt me. So that's one place where, you can say no, and you should say no because it's your body and you are going to Pilates presumably to feel and function better, right? To get stronger, to get more flexible, and to feel better in your body. So getting pushed to a place of pain or injury is really not part of that program, right? It's not part of the plan. Now, as a teacher, and especially as a newer teacher or an apprentice teacher, you also have the right to say no. And in this case, you have the right to say no to a studio owner or manager, whoever's doing the scheduling of classes and clients. You can say no to working with clients who are really out of your ability range at this particular moment. I see so many newer teachers in Pilates groups on Reddit, in Pilates groups on Facebook, posting on Instagram, and talking about the fact that they're getting people in their classes that they really have no idea how to deal with. And so they, start literally crowdsourcing how to offer modifications or work with clients, some of whom have, pretty serious injuries or chronic illnesses. And I'm thinking to myself, if they're working in a structured environment and everybody involved knows that they are newer or apprentice teachers, why are they getting handed clients who really need a more experienced eye? I understand, wanting to make some money. I understand wanting to get those clients in, but I feel like it's a disservice to the teacher, the apprentice or the new teacher. It's definitely a disservice to the client. And it ends up being a disservice to the entire studio because oftentimes those clients either complain or they stop coming. I would much rather see a studio refer that client out to a quote unquote competitor who may be much more familiar with the issue than put that client with an apprentice or new teacher simply because you want the dollars in the account and want the body in the studio. So as a new teacher, it is really unfair for you to be in a position to have to say no to that. However, I think that you should be able to say no and to say why. I've also seen, some teacher feedback, especially from newer teachers, some of whom have been hired on contracts overseas, that they are working in private studio environments where the teacher teaches in a certain way and things are very rehab oriented, which they often are out of the country. And these newer teachers who are not prepared to do that, and oftentimes actually don't have the same certification background as the studio owner and the other teachers. So they're, at a disadvantage there as well, because they may not have learned some of the same variations and modifications and ways of looking at the body, are being asked to see clients that are beyond, once again, their ability and the scope of what they can do. Now, I used to own brick and mortar studios. I understand that need for flow and that need for your apprentices to be practicing, but these are not the clients for them to practice on. And again, it's not fair to anybody. Okay. Also, however, as a teacher, and especially as a more experienced teacher, you will find yourself just in dialogue with your clients. And if you're working in the studio, more in dialogue with the studio owners, because they'll be a little bit more of your peers. So at this point, with most of my clients, they have times when they think that they want to do an exercise or a certain stretch, but they come in complaining of lower back pain or shoulder pain or something going on. And I know for sure that the stretch they're requesting will make things worse. And I'll say no to them, but I'll always explain why and then offer them a better option. By the same token, I've had times where I ask a client to do an exercise. For whatever reason, it doesn't feel great to them. And they say, no, I don't want to do this in this way. And then I'll take them to a different piece of apparatus or a different place and do a similar movement that works on the same area, but perhaps in a slightly different position or a slightly more assisted way or a slightly less aggressive way. Now, I understand that newer teachers may not be able to extemporaneously, off the cuff, just come up with variations, modifications, and 14 different places in the studio that somebody can do the same exercise. And that is why, both as clients and as teachers, we should be able to say no and engage in dialogue about that. If there's something you don't know, then you don't know it, period. And it's not fair to practice until you do know it. And that means that, maybe you don't take the client that day, but maybe you take the client a few weeks later after you have done a little bit of research and maybe talk to other teachers and your master teachers to find out what kind of modifications that client may need. So I would like to see more dialogue amongst Pilates colleagues, amongst different studios, amongst apprentices, and especially between clients and teachers on really the boundaries of, what we can do in Pilates, of what the client, should be doing and could be doing versus what the client wants to do, and what, and meet somewhere in the middle so that your client is having a good time and feeling good, but still getting the hard work that they need. And that you are working in a space where you feel comfortable and where you understand what kind of modifications and variations that client may need that will still be safe. Look, sometimes a teacher will go through teacher training and have a specific injury coming in, or a chronic pain thing, or, some injure themselves while they're in their training, because training does, last for at least 6 months. And therefore, they end up, even as a new teacher, being kind of a specialist in that topic because it became the topic of discussion around their own modifications and variations in their privates and classes for themselves and in their self-practice. And also became something that, they became comfortable teaching because of all the self-teaching they had to do and all of the times that they heard those same corrections, modifications, and variations for their own bodies. So that does happen. And I have seen, new teachers and apprentices who are excellent in handling, lower back pain or a cervical fusion in the neck or, carpal tunnel or any of a host of injuries because they had the same thing. So I'm not saying that no new and apprentice teachers are capable of working with a special population client, but I am saying that not everybody is. Not everybody is comfortable doing it. And the place to do that is in training, say, with other apprentices who may have the issue or with friends and family who may have an issue and are willing to let you do the research that you need to do and then work with them. It does kind of scare me that teachers are being put into positions of teaching clients that are really out of their current scope of practice. And I think that, teachers should always be looking to take continuing education and expand their scope of practice. But let's face it, after you've just spent, 6 months to a year and 5 figures on your Pilates certification, you want to make some money before you start going for continuing ed that you really don't need for a year or two anyway. And I totally understand that. So just be clear on who you're comfortable working with, especially if you take a job overseas where people have spent a lot of money on getting you a work permit, getting you the appropriate visas, giving you paid holidays and all of the other things that you get with the contract. Don't go on the assumption that the owner is totally going to understand what you're comfortable with and what you're not. Find out from the beginning the kind of clients you will be expected to work with and teach. And then while you're in the getting your paperwork together for the visa and visa approval process, you can get out there in some Pilates studios, do some observation, talk to some other teachers, and do some research on the different issues that the studio owner brings up to you as things they will expect you to know how to handle when you show up. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Again, you can say no. Thank you so much for listening as always. And if you love the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you would go to Spotify, Podchaser, or the Apple Podcast app and leave a rating and a written review. And know that this Thursday, I'm super excited to bring you some very real conversations about sales and selling your Pilates services with the wonderful Sarah Walton. So I will talk to you guys soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.